Here's the context. It's a Saturday, and you're with your kids at home, and it's the one Saturday out of the year that you've got nothing to do and nothing going on, and so you're just enjoying some family time, and your kids are playing with each other. They're doing well. They do one thing, and then they move on to the next, and then they move on to the next, and they're out of things to do, and they start to try to find the next thing, getting a little bit stir-crazy when you hear them say this phrase. See if you can finish it for me. Mom, Dad, I'm bored. You did it. Good job. You've probably never heard a youth minister say this. My goal for you today is to be bored. I want this to be the most boring sermon that you've ever heard. And in fact, I really don't even plan for you to learn anything. And so when it comes time to talk through application, I'm not going to give you very many points, maybe just a couple of questions to reflect on. But man, today I just want you to be bored. So welcome to Corinth Christian Church. Here's why. We just don't get bored anymore. We just don't. Because there's always something to do. There's groceries to buy and meals to cook and kitchens to clean. There's clothes to shop for and outfits to wear and then laundry to wash and either fold or throw into the corner of your room, depending on who you are. There's cars to maintain so that you can drive them to and from work or to the ball field every single day. Budgets to update, tasks to complete, emails to send, data to analyze, things to build. The holiday season doesn't really make it any better, because there's presents to buy and parties to attend and cards to mail and food to prepare and elves to shelf and decorations to put up and now decorations to take down. And we just don't get bored anymore because there's always something to do. And even if you find a window of some sort of time, you fill it with something because you don't like being bored. And you entertain yourselves to death because when there's not something to do, there's something to view. And so there's media to scroll and games to watch and shows to binge and podcasts to listen to and news to see. And so if there's nothing to do, we find something because we don't like being bored. So this morning, I just want you to be bored. You did well with the first fill in the blank. See if you can get another one. It's a popular phrase in our culture. It goes like this: don't just sit there, do something. What I came to tell you today is just a little bit different. Don't just do something, sit there. And as I've reflected on 2024 for me personally and have been looking ahead to 2025, I'm just convinced that maybe that's what we all need. And so what I really came to tell you today, bottom line at the front, 2025 may just be the year we need to sit down and be quiet. Mark chapter 4. Verses 35 through 41 is going to be our text for the day. So if you've got a Bible, I'd love for you to turn there or head there on your Bible app, or you can pull out your church center to get sermon notes or pay attention to the things up on the screen. Before we jump into what we'll read today, let me catch you up with some context. Jesus' ministry has taken off. And before you even get into the second chapter of Mark's gospel, Jesus has such a giant reputation in the community, and people are bringing him tons and tons and tons of sick people and demon-possessed people, and Jesus is spending time with them, taking care of them long after the sun goes down. He's in high demand. There's always something to do and someone to minister to, and he's up late, and yet before the next day, he always is up before the sun to spend time with the Father and pray. And you hit chapter 2, you finally get there, and Jesus is teaching more, and he's healing more, and he's actually now beginning to have discourse with the religious leaders, which is going to be a problem later. Mark chapter 3 comes, and Jesus already has massive crowds that are following him around the area of Galilee. In fact, many of the people who had come and traveled from hundreds of miles away just to come see him. And by the time you get to Mark chapter 4, Jesus is teaching along the Sea of Galilee to a massive crowd. And he tells parables and he tells stories. Then, verse 35. As evening came, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let's cross to the other side of the lake." So they took Jesus in the boat, and started out, leaving the crowds behind, although other boats followed. That one's interesting to me. I didn't catch that till this week. That Jesus is trying to get away from the crowd, the noise, the chaos, the demand, and they just keep following him. They're like, yeah, we got boats too. That also means that a lot of people are about to see what happens and what Jesus does. Verse 37, but soon a fierce storm came up. High waves were breaking into the boat, and it began to fill with water. Jesus was sleeping at the back of the boat with his head on a cushion. The disciples woke him up, shouting, "Teacher, don't you care that we are going to drown?" When Jesus woke up, he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, "Silence, be still." Suddenly, the wind stopped, and there was great calm. Let's just pause there. Just imagine it for a moment. A great calm. Guys, you might know it. Like a really, really cold winter morning, in the middle of the woods during deer season. Ladies, you might recognize it. Cool summer morning, sunrise over the beach before anybody else makes their way out there. Jesus says, "Silence, be still." And the wind and the waves, they obey. And it's calm. Verse 40. Then he asked them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" The disciples were absolutely terrified. "Who is this man?" they asked each other. "Even the wind and the waves obey him." Now, what you need to know about this story, and really this story and then the next three in Mark chapter 5, Mark is trying to tell us something about the identity of Jesus. And so here, Jesus calms a storm so as to say that Jesus has power over the earth. The next story comes in Mark chapter 5, and Jesus cast out a demon from a possessed man so as to say that Jesus has power and control over the spiritual realm. Then Jesus heals a woman with a 12-year ailment so as to say that Jesus has power over the human body. And Mark chapter 5 ends with Jesus raising a young girl from death to life so as to say that Jesus, he's got power and control even over death. And the point is this, that God's power overcomes every threat to life and wholeness, and he can put the whole world back to what it is supposed to be. And if you are reading this for the first time, by the time you finish chapter 5 and you see Jesus calm the storm and cast out a demon and heal a woman with a disease that had lasted 12 years, and then you see him raise someone from death to life, you're gonna close chapter 5 and you're gonna know Jesus is God. That's who he is. And so Mark is clearly, over the course of these stories, he is focusing on the identity of who Jesus is. But as he writes, there's really something very interesting to note about the way of Jesus. That in the midst of all of the noise and the chaos, both the demanding crowds and the raging storms, he rests. You find him napping on a boat. I wonder when was the last time you rested? Like, more than just a good night's sleep. More than just a Saturday afternoon on the couch watching a couple of football games. More than a summer vacation away from work. I wonder when the last time was that you had real, true rest. The type that quiets your mind and brings you peace because you know that your life is surrendered to the one who can rebuke the chaos and reorder the world to make things right again. When was the last time you had that? For me, the answer is in October. When the church gave me the opportunity to travel out to the mountains of Colorado for a retreat called CIY Wilderness. And the point of this retreat was a little bit different than most of the retreats and conferences in the world. And the point was not to learn anything. The point was not to do anything. The point was just to rest and to be No phones, no TVs, no computers, no fun, or anything like that. Just kidding. There was lots of fun. But it was just to rest. And each day was just better than the next. Every single morning started with prayer and then breakfast and then worship. And then after worship was over, they encouraged us to just head out into the wilderness for 3 to 4 hours and just be quiet and try to listen for God's voice. And so I found a spot that you see up on the screen, and pictures don't do it justice if you've been out to Colorado. And that's where I sat and just listened. And after a while, lunchtime came around, and we would all eat lunch together. And then they would encourage us to take the afternoon to enjoy creation and community. And so that often looked like me grabbing a couple other youth pastors and going to play fetch with ourselves with some plastic circles. It's called disc golf. And then after that, we would have dinner, and then we would worship, and then we would share in small groups. And I tell you, that week, it was just what I needed. Because before the week, I felt like I was running on fumes. And a lot of you know what that feels like. After the week, I just felt refreshed. And I heard the Lord reveal several things to me. One of them being this: Luke, the pace at which you are living is going to burn you, not bless you. In other words, peace. Be still. In other words, sit down and be quiet. Drown out the senseless noise. Rebuke the busy. Get bored and rest so that you create space for me to speak into your life. Jesus looks at all of the noise and he just says, shh. We just read the New Living Translation, which tells us that the words Jesus used for the storm was silence, be still. The English Standard Version is a really popular translation for this story as well, because they choose to use the word peace. So Jesus says to the storm, peace, be still. But if you really want to get nerdy for a minute and look at what the Greek says, that as Mark is telling us this story, what Jesus actually says is this: be silent and silence. So be quiet and stay quiet. I'm sure many of you have said that to your kids before. You know, Psalm chapter 46 is what this reminds me of. It's one of my favorites. I've shared it with you before, but listen to some of the chaos that the writer of Psalm 46 describes. And verse 2, the earth is giving way and mountains fall into the heart of the sea. Sounds loud, sounds noisy, sounds like a bunch of chaos. Verse 3 says that the waters are roaring and foaming and the mountains are quaking with their surging. Sounds loud, sounds noisy, sounds chaotic. And verse 6, we're told that nations are in uproar and that kingdoms are falling. And that sounds loud and that sounds noisy and that sounds chaotic. And so in Psalm chapter 46, what you're dealing with is someone who's in the midst of crazy and chaos and there's nothing but noise. But you know verse 10. God says, be still and know that I am God. And then you start to just take in the rest of the psalm, and you'll notice God's activity and God's character and God's presence. Because it's also in that psalm where it is written, He is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in trouble. And we're told that God will come and help. We're told that the Lord Almighty is with us and that the God of Jacob is our fortress. And we're told that He is the one who makes wars cease, and He breaks the bow and shatters the spear, and He burns the shields with fire. And so it is He who is saying to the chaos and to the noise, be quiet and stay quiet. And it is He who says to you, rest. It is He who says to you, I've got this. You don't need to worry about it. You don't need to be afraid. Just remember who I am. And so it's interesting, in Mark chapter 4, Jesus looks at the noise and the chaos, and he says, be quiet and stay quiet. And then he asks the disciples why they were afraid. Well, the disciples are like, well, did you not see the storm that was just there? But the reason that the disciples were actually afraid is because they didn't really know who Jesus was yet. But you do. You know that the Jesus in Mark chapter 4 is God, the same one who is quieting the chaos in Psalm chapter 46. And the same one who is right now, in this very moment, he is putting all of the world back to the way that it's supposed to be. And his invitation to you is to rest. And to sit down. And to be quiet. And to trust that he is holding all things together. Because the creator of all things is still the sustainer of all things. And I don't know what this next year is going to bring. If I had any guesses, I'd probably say a lot of the same things. A lot of things that make us feel like the world is spinning out of control. A lot of noise, a lot of conflict, a lot of chaos, a lot of unrest, a lot of uneasiness. Probably a lot of wild. For sure, a little bit of chaos. But remember, Jesus told us that things would get hard and be bad. So the question that I'm asking is have I let all of that noise keep me from hearing God's voice? And truthfully, man, the answer is yes, way more often than I'd like to admit. And so this year, I'm convinced that I just need to sit down and be quiet. To be bored, so that space is created to hear God's voice and renew my trust in the one who has all things under his careful control. And maybe you need that too. So let me just give you a couple of questions to consider over the next couple of days as another year turns over. And question number one, and this is going to be a hard one if you're at least honest with yourself. What do you need to remove for rest? What in your life needs to go so that more space and margin is created for you to have true, real rest in the presence of God, to listen for his voice? Now, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm a little bit intense. I've heard both of those things often. But I'm just not so sure that the pace in which many of us live is actually honoring to Jesus, and I'm pretty confident it's not helping us either. So ask yourself, where's all the noise coming from? What's keeping you from rest? 2025 may just be the year to have some hard conversations about some things that might need to go. Dads, if the job is demanding 70 hours a week, might be time to reevaluate some goals. Moms, if you feel more like a chauffeur to and from practices and ball games than you do a caregiver, it might be time to give up travel ball. If your screen time embarrasses you every single week, it might be time to get off social media. If Netflix asks you every single night whether or not you're still watching, it might be time to cancel some subscriptions. I don't know. I'm just trying to get your imagination going because I can't answer these questions for you. But I can tell you a story. I was homeschooled, which makes a lot of sense if you get to know me. And I ended up doing a second-year senior thing in high school just so that I could lay back and take some free college classes that I could eventually transfer to my future Bible college and so that I could keep playing sports. There were two that I played. I played soccer and I played basketball. Loved both of them. Truthfully, was a lot better at soccer. I'd played since I was 4. By the time I was 10 or 11, I had joined a club and started playing competitively, and we traveled a lot all of the time. And by the time I got into high school, I kept that, but then added basketball to the mix. And so every single day pretty much looked like this. Wake up and get as much school done as you can so that you can drive 45 minutes up to basketball practice where you're there for about 2.5 hours. Get into the car and immediately drive 1 hour and 15 minutes the other way to soccer practice where you're there for about 2 hours. And then drive 45 minutes back home. to eat dinner, to shower, and to finish up whatever school you didn't finish. Dinner time was about 10 p.m. And truthfully, man, I loved it because I was in high school until it caught up to me. And heading into that second senior year, I had the option to continue with both of those sports, but I decided to hang up the soccer cleats because I just didn't like who I was becoming on the soccer field. I'll spare you the details. You can ask me about them later. But what I'll just tell you is this: I was a lot less like Jesus than I needed to be when it was time to lace up the cleats. And so I removed soccer, and it was hard, and I missed it. But it was also that year where I finally started to feel like I was getting familiar and comfortable with the presence of God. Because I removed something that took up so much space. And all of a sudden, there was a little bit more quiet and calm to begin to hear his voice. I would make that decision again and again and again, and maybe even sooner. I've got friends who have decided to give up watching football for a year. They love football. They've got teams that they root for and cheer on, just like you do. But they were like, man, this is taking up too much time. It's not helping us become any more like Jesus, and it's just constantly on our minds, and we want to be thinking about different things. I've got friends who have removed apps from their phone. I've got friends that have sold their Xboxes. And all of those things like they seem crazy, and maybe they even seem radical. But honestly, continuing to live life as fast as we have been seems even crazier. And so I don't know what it might be for you, but maybe there's something that could be removed in order for you to find more rest and to create more space to hear God's voice. Second question I want you to consider over the next couple of days as we turn over into a new year is just, what do you need to remember for rest? What do you need to remind yourself of so that you can experience rest? Psalm chapter 46, the writer says, we will not fear because God is here and he's got this. And in Mark chapter 4, the disciples are in fear because they didn't recognize who Jesus was yet. But maybe one of the things that will help you rest this year is to remember this: that the one you surrendered your life to has the power to overcome the chaos and the noise and is inviting you into his rest. Think about the creation story with me for just a moment. Go all the way back to Genesis chapter 1. On day 1, God creates light with just the power of his word. On day 2, God creates the sky to separate the heavens and the earth. On day 3, he creates the land and the sea and gives us plants and trees and oceans. Day 4, he fills the sky with the sun and the moon and the stars. Day 5, he creates birds to fly and fish to swim. Day 6, he creates all sorts of animals to roam on the land. And then at the end of day 6, he does his best work. And he breathes life and stamps his image upon mankind. And he says, that's very good. You guys know this. Day 7 comes around. What does God do? God rests. So here's what I want you to notice. Adam's, mankind's, his first day was a day of rest. Now, don't get me wrong. He was going to work. God was going to task him with the care for the earth and was going to say, hey, I'm giving this to you. Would you govern over it? But for Adam, that was day 2. For mankind, day 1 was just to sit and rest and enjoy the presence of God. And church, I just think we get the order wrong. Like, we live in a culture that just tells you over and over and over again that you work so that you can rest. The way of Jesus is to rest so that you can work. And maybe you need to remember that the good news of Jesus Christ means that you can enter into the rest that God is providing in his presence. Now listen, before we wrap this up, let me tell you this. This slow and quiet pace of Jesus is not an invitation to be slothful, to be lazy, or to be passive. if you pay attention to Jesus and read through his story, you'll notice very quickly that he's one of the hardest working dudes ever. Constantly ministering to people, constantly training up his disciples, constantly moving from one place to the next. He had a mission and he knew what it was, and he was focused on that. But he got the order of things right. And he rested, then he worked. And here's just the honest truth. Some of you guys have been sitting down and on the sidelines for way too long. And maybe the sermon you needed to hear tonight was the opposite. Maybe what you need to hear is don't just sit there, do something. You've been sitting there long enough. Get involved. Find a place to serve. Sign up for Night to Shine. Stop being a spectator, because following Jesus isn't a spectator sport. You're a participant. But for all of us, no matter where you're at, let's make sure that we get the order of things right. First, before anything else, let's sit down and be quiet. So I want to challenge you. Remove one thing for all of 2025. You're in the spirit of New Year's resolutions right now anyway. So start to take inventory. What in my life has occupied so much space that I just can't rest anymore? Whenever I do have a moment, what do I go to entertain myself so that I can't get bored? Remove it. It'll be there for you next year. Remove one thing for all of 2025. I've saved maybe the best for last, because rest is the invitation that comes out of Jesus' own mouth, you understand. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And so the invitation of Jesus is this, man, if you are tired of the noise and the chaos is overwhelming and your mind is spinning because it feels like the world is spinning out of control, then come and rest in the presence of the one who has all things in his careful control. And so if you're tired and if you're worn out and you're ready to surrender your life to the one who has the power over all of the noise, then today is a great day to do that. Today is a great day to put your faith in Jesus Christ and to experience the blessing of baptism and to confess him as Lord and Savior and experience forgiveness and be indwelled with the gift of the Spirit and to begin doing life with the presence of God. Man, he loves you so much. He wants what's best for you, and what's best for you is to be with him. So if you're not with him, today's the day that we can change that. If you're watching online and you have a decision to make, corinth.cc/decided is a great resource for you to tell us about what the Lord's doing in your life right now so that we can come alongside of you and help you take a next step and pray with you. If you're in the room, you can certainly use that website as well. You can use the app and the dashboard and the card. You realize we put all of these things in front of you so that you can use them. Or you can come talk to me. And let me pray over what the Lord is revealing to you right now. But for all of us, let's just sit down and be quiet. And maybe, as you have been for the last 30 minutes, get a little bit bored. Father, thank you for your blessings. Many of them came over the last year, and you are faithful always, and so we expect many of them to come this next year. Father, forgive us for whenever we let busy and distraction run our lives instead of you. Help us to eliminate what's distracting us from you. Help us to remove what's keeping us from you. And may we all find just a little bit of rest in your amazing grace and presence. In the name of the Father, Son, and Spirit, we pray. Amen. Church, we hope to see you back next week for Believe Again. Great opportunity to invite a friend. We'll see you next week.